presentations in 3 parts. D2, Dowsing, and genealogical narratives. I'm going to start with Dowsing. Now, I'm not. I'm going to start with D2. How many of you have used D2 on the graves? If you haven't, D2 is a biologic solution. You can only get on the internet. You can't buy it someplace else. And you magically spray it on your tombstones, and you wait, and it cleans them.
Oh.
I mean, it is fantastic. Evelyn is the one that introduced us to it from the Tennessee room. And the lovely thing is it does not harm the stones. It is used at Arlington National Cemetery and other places. And I wanted to show you I did some of this for Bemis. This is in the Liberty Cumberland Presbyterian Church Cemetery in, thank you, McMinnville, Tennessee. It's his family's. And this is a period 1906, probably a little earlier because Martha died earlier, tombstone. Now, the one on the very top is what it looked like before D2. This is under a holly tree in the shade. When D2 took off, we couldn't read her name when we first started. All right, when Jean and I did not make another picture that day, when we went in July. Her stone is now clear. It works over time. Some of the others, I've gotten some newer ones that will, okay, now, do I just click to make it go forward? I'm sorry.
Over to the side.
Click on the side.
Yeah.
There it is. All right, this is his 3rd great-grandmother's. You can look on there, you couldn't read it. And then with the first spray, when we went back, it's white this July. So you can see it. The nice thing is when you first spray it, you can read it, even with just the first spray. But over time, it does clean it. Now I'm gonna have some that are even more this is my great-grandmother, 3rd great-grandmother, Nancy Tucker Trotter. And her stone is period to when she died in the 1880s today. All right, this is just going back after a little bit. Now it's white. Matthew McCauley's, you can see the drastic, and that stuff is nasty. Have you ever tried to get that stuff off? I don't know what it is, but we in West Tennessee have some nasty stuff that grows on our tombstones. Now this is in Husberg, Humphreys County. Now this is the stone. When I first saw it, I'm a doll collector and I got this doll and I just loved her, so I posed her my wedding. I named her Tenny. That would have been his niece who died before she was 2, and I thought it was just appropriate. But the stone, you can see it's cleaned, but I'm going to show you what it looked like when we got there in May this year. That's it.
Wow.
Now, it did take more than one application because William was captured at in 1862. What is that battle, Gene? We've been there a dozen times. Fort Donelson. He was captured at Fort Donelson. He was taken prisoner in the Union and he died in captivity. And I have not doused that grave. Every time I go, I forget my dowsing rods, and I want to douse it to see if he's actually in that grave. But that stone is period to the time. What a difference D2 made.
What do you put the D2 on with? What do you use?
Okay, actually, you see, this is my husband, Gwen McReynolds, your official dowsing rod person.
You can go to Home Depot, Harbor Freight, wherever. I get a small pressurized spray bottle, the pump up kind.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it with a hand squeeze, but you're gonna wear your hand out pretty quick. But get a small one because it's expensive stuff and you don't need a whole lot, usually a gallon or less. And
We're still on our first
spray it
gallon.
on.
And what he does first is he sprays the thing with
Spray
water.
it. I take 2 gallons of water in the pressurized sprayer and wet it down, and then spray the D2 on it.
So when you but it takes a while before you can see.
Right.
So
Yeah,
how do you know how much to?
You just spray it, and then you just go.
I just try to wet it equally and, well, start at the top because it's gonna flow down and do it that way. It's not like when you pressure wash your house, they say start at the bottom and work up so that all the junk keeps flowing off properly, but I usually start at the top and come down.
And it does take longer in areas that don't get the sun.
Yeah.
Does it matter if the stone is granite or marble or?
It works on marble, it works on granite, and I'm not sure what the log house is made of.
Limestone?
It does not work on lime. I'm not sure if limestone, I've not tried it, because all of the ones are older stones that we've tried.
He's done it.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Does it work on, okay, does work on limestone. Now, this is, pardon?
No.
No scrubbing. Now, I will tell you that if you buy it online, they're gonna give you some scrub brushes, and if it's really bad, you use delicate scrub brushes. You
Yeah.
don't use a wire
Maybe
brush.
like, you know how intricate that stone right there is in Waverly, we would take it and like almost a toothbrush type thing and work it into the crevices. Sometimes you have to do that, but you're not trying to remove it. Don't try to remove the lichen and all the moss and all that other stuff by scrubbing. Let the product work.
Now, it's say, if you're wanting to read it before you spray it, that may be one reason that you scrub it just a little bit. This is the Bowen, that's where Williams, this is the Bowen plot in Waverly. This is before we did anything. And this was in May. You can tell the major difference. So it has been, now I'd say, this particular, the clicking sound,
Yeah. I don't know what that is. From the computer. Did you
Not sure
do
where
that?
that is. Not sure where that is. I don't know.
I thought maybe since I was talking about death, it was just the death.
Question,
Yes, ma'am.
does rain wash that off?
No, it doesn't. In fact, rain activates it.
Rain helps you.
Rain and sunshine are what activates it. So if you've had a long dry spell, it's not going to work as well as it does. Now, you don't want to spray it the day it rains, but rain activates it.
Here's a sample.
Oh, wow. It's just, you walk and you go, whoa!
Whatever it was,
Yeah.
stop.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm Cumberland Presbyterian, and I'm part of the Historical Foundation of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church, and we maintain the birthplace shrine in Humphreys County.
Oh, Dixon County.
Dixon County, I'm sorry. Sorry, thank you, Dixon County. In 1940s, the CP Church put this little log house to mark the spot where the Reverend Samuel McAdoo's house was. This is what it looked like before D2. Now, I will tell you that some evil child carved his or her initials on it. But this is what it looked like when we were there in October. It's pristine. Now, what's neat, and I don't have a picture of this because it really doesn't. You can, how many of you have been to Montgomery Bell? Have any of you ever been to the, okay. When you walk in the gate to the birthplace, the chapel's here, you walk down, that is now, if the sun's hitting it, like a beacon, because it is so white. Now, you will notice that down here, it didn't clean it as well. It took off the lichen and the other stuff, but it still, it didn't get it pristine as it did the log house.
How long does it take to work?
You know, I don't really know because I don't go back that quickly. Like at Liberty, we did it in August and then we went back in July. Or Humphreys County, I've gone, but usually at least 3 months.
3 to 6 months, you'll start seeing it. Within 3 to 6 months, and then in 2 years, you get it to pretty much being like brand new.
All right, that concludes my presentation of order yourself some D2 and go to the cemetery and clean those stones because it breaks your heart when you go in.
So you had to order it?
You have to order it.
Okay, now, how exactly do you search for it? Because when I'm calling it up on Amazon, I'm getting a whole bunch of vitamins.
Okay, D2 biologic cleaner. D-2 biologic cleaner.
I get it from a monument company in North Georgia.
The one that I order from that you can find on the internet is called Atlas Preservation. They're strictly a tombstone monument.
And they advertise in the DAR magazine.
Yeah.
If you look at your October quarterly, David has an article and he's talking about ordering that.
Yeah, you can get there or you can get it from Atlas. I was gonna get Atlas's page to load the past few times.
Really?
Weird.
Well, I will confess, the first time my daughter-in-law ordered it for me, and the second time my brother ordered it for me, so I don't want to do it. I paid for it, but they didn't. The next thing I'm going to talk about is dowsing, and I went to, we had a DAR workshop, and they presented, the chaplain at the time presented on dowsing graves. Well, all of us just kind of looked at her like, oh, yeah? And she talked about it, and she demonstrated and told us how to do it. Well, Gene and I were going to his family's church, to McMinnville, to the cemetery for the,
Dedication.
well, whatever that, you know, where they ask you for money and to keep the cemetery up. And we were going to spend the night because we had a family reunion also. So I took my coat hangers and had him make my dowsing rods. And he was, oh no, that doesn't work, you know. And I showed him. And the next morning when we got ready to go, I said, you sure you don't want to try? He said, okay. Curmudgeon. And so he took it out and he went like this and it did it. And I will say he used an expletive. And then we went to the cemetery and he had so much fun. The Liberty Cemetery was used as a Civil War hospital. So in the middle, the dowsing rods go nuts because of all the graves that are there. It will even pick up cremains. Now, how does it work? Nobody knows. It's a mystery as to how this actually works. All right, I'm going to demonstrate, and then I'm going to show you some things that I have done with it. All right, Gina's made your dowsing rods. You can't use plastic hangers. You have to use, now the reason they're going nuts is because there's males and females in here and it doesn't know what to do. So it's just going crazy. You want to lie on the floor for me? All right. I'm gonna lie there, and I have to do it this way because if I do it that way, it's gonna pick up all of y'all. It does work on live people as well as dead people. It also works, unfortunately, it's what people use for plumbing and electricity sometimes, but you know, generally you don't have that in a cemetery, so you don't have to worry. But the rods, you have to hold them loosely so that they move on their own. Because if they don't, boy, the female presence in here is stronger than the male. Now, the dowsing rods are held, they have to be metal. They are used actually in the Chattanooga National Cemetery. Before they bury anybody, they check out to make sure that there are no graves, so they don't dig. All right, if the rod, it's probably my brother, if the rod in your right hand goes to the left, it's female. If the rod in your right hand goes, left hand goes to the right, it's a male. I won't tell you how the DAR lady told us to remember that. I will too. She said, if it goes right, men always think they're right. So.
Maybe we're outnumbered here, right?
I looked and said, I can do that. Now, the other interesting thing is, I'm going to demonstrate with Jean here. Okay. Obviously, whoops, I've got too many males. I've got too much. Go this way. He is a good sport.
I'll never get up.
All right. Notice my rod is going to the right. Now there's some electricity in here. And when I get, it's not working as well in here. There's too much electricity.
It opened back up.
Yeah. It will open back up. It will cross at the feet or the head and open back up when you hit the end of the grave. That's how you can tell if it is an infant, a child, or an adult. So the dowsing rod allows you to know if it's male or female, if it's an infant, an adult, or a child. Now here's some of the things. We'll do some more, but the problem is when there's this much electricity, it doesn't work as well because it pulls.
What if they're cremated?
They're cremated, all you can tell is if it's male or female. And when we went to Liberty Cemetery for the next year, or maybe it was that year, one of his relatives was there. And he said, well, does it work on cremains? And I said, well, she said it did. He said, well, I know where some are. And he and I went out, by golly, it was a male. And I will tell you when I did it, I was by myself in the Ebenezer Humphreys County Cemetery, and the groundskeeper was there. And of course, when somebody's out in the cemetery, he had to come over and check me out. I said, I know it looks like I'm practicing witchcraft, but I'm not. And then he was so excited, he played with the dowsing rods himself. He said, I'm going home and making me some. Because what he'd done to do graves is you take the large pole, you know, and go down. Well, that just tells you if there's a body there. Now, what's fun is when they put the tombstones later after the people have been buried, and the man is where the woman. It says woman, and you can tell that. All right. Okay, let's see if this thing will come back up. This is the Oakland Cemetery in Trenton. My third great-grandfather, Rollo P. Raines, and his wife are buried there in the oldest part of the cemetery. I wanted to know, of course I've researched them, and I cannot find my second great-grandmother. Her husband, who is Dr. Fleming Parks Lawrence, is buried in Trimble. That's his grave, there's nobody else by him. I later found out that grandmother Rowena died in Obion County, but have no idea. So I thought, well, I'm gonna see if they're, usually the families buy plots. She died in 1880, April of 1880. And I thought, well, maybe she's buried with her parents. That makes sense. There were trains that she would have taken back. And since he was the town doctor in Kenton, it wouldn't have been his family home. And so I thought, okay. So Jean and I went, and you can see the red and the flags. Blow it up. Well, that might be fun.
There.
Oh, it did blow up. Yay. Okay, so we took the flags, and my trusty helper there, as I doused, we ran the string and the flags to mark so that we could tell. Now, you can't see from that, but after I got through, okay, I have to take it down to find my arrow again. I do know that. Next time you're gonna get a technologically smart person. All right, I then made my chart of what I found. Rolla is identified because of his tombstone. Catherine is identified, she's Betsy, identified with her tombstone. There are no other tombstones in the field. But there was a male child, a female child, a female child, a female infant, a female adult, and another female adult. I think this is my grandmother, Rowena. Now, who this is, I do not know. I don't know any of the children, because look at the time they died. And they children born between censuses, and there are no records. I do know that this male child is Richard. And the reason I know that is Richard was on the 1870 census. He was not on the 1880 census. And you can see he should have been on the 1870 census. He would have only been 15 years old. So I'm fairly sure that that is Richard. But that's the only one. I can tell it's a male. I can tell it's a child. But maybe they'll work DNA where we can dig up somebody and figure it out. I'm sorry, that's rude.
How did you say you tell if it's a child or an infant?
All right, when you're going, okay, I'm gonna pretend. All right, if I'm standing at the headstone, when I'm standing here, it's gonna cross, like to the female. When I get to the end of the body, it's gonna uncross.
Oh, I see.
It's just magic.
Yeah.
And that, you can tell by the length of how long it is. Now, if it's a small little lady, you might not be able to tell if it's a child or an adult. I do want to show you, this is the stone for R.P. Raines that I first saw in 2012. Let me go back to, that's the stone now. I think what happened, and this is Elizabeth stone, they looked great, but you know what I bet they used? Clorox. Because the stone has deteriorated enough that I'm afraid they used a product they should not have used, and Clorox will do that. You know, and a lot of people thought, oh, I can scrub it and I can Clorox it and it'll be fine. But that, I strongly feel, and Jean and I have meant to get back and get some epoxy, and hopefully it's still intact, we just haven't made it back. All right, another family mystery. And I know you have these family stories, 80% of them are wrong, but my granddaddy said that his mama had had a baby. The firstborn child was a male, and he died. She also had had a set of twins. There was no proof, no Bible record. As I'm working the 1900 census, oh, by the way, my great-grandmother had triplets that did survive. So I knew I need to do that for family findings. But I got the 1900 census. What is so neat in the 1900 census for women?
Told how many children they had.
It tells how many births they've given and how many living. Right there, it gave the 3 that I didn't have any records for. 1910 does the same thing. By 1910, she had given 12 births and had 9 living children. The triplets were born on the 19th of August, 1900, so they weren't in that 1900 census. All right, I'm going to, I should have reversed these slides. This is the Union Cemetery in Dickson County. I found that my second great uncle, Thomas Billingsley Loggins, who by the way was the president and owner of Dickson Normal School in Dickson County, that's where the very first female senator was taught, Hattie B. Wyatt, or Hattie Ophelia Wyatt. I can't think of her last name. That's her maiden, Wyatt was her maiden name. Caraway, thank you very much. And so I was there and I went to see the records. They actually had a book. Well, in the book is the plot. They identified the 8 graves in the plot that my Uncle TB had bought. Notice the checks. All it said was Loggins, Loggins. I learned how to douse. So I told Jean, taking my rods, I'm going to see what's in those 2 graves because it didn't have names. I knew from researching the censuses there were 6 Loggins boys. The only Loggins wife who'd had children that would have been in that cemetery and matched the records for 1900 was my grandmother, Tira Eola Larkins Loggins. So Jean and I went. I doused the graves. All right. John Mitchell Trotter was Lily Trotter, Walter Trotter Loggins, and right next to who would have been their uncle was a girl and a boy infant grave. That's the only thing I know. Those had to be the twins. Now, what were their names? Did they die probably died prematurely? They would have been born sometime around 1892 because my grandfather was born in 1892 and I know the ages of the others. So they would have been born within the span between Aunt Sam and Aunt Bowen, and Aunt Bowen was born in Dyer County. So they had to be born in that 18 period. I have my granddaddy Henry in Dickson City in 1892, 93. But can I prove it? No, but I believe it. Oh, by the way, Uncle TB and Aunt Addie are not buried there. They are buried in Arizona, where he went because his daughter's husband had tuberculosis, and so they went to Arizona and he and his wife. So those 2 plots are empty. So I told Gene, you know, if we get desperate, we're gonna go prove that we can be buried in Dixon County. Because there's no bodies there. All right, recently, because I was gonna do this, I went and doused my family graves, my maiden name graves, in the Walnut Grove Baptist Church Cemetery in Gibson County. And my brother went with me. Now, he didn't walk off and look at the graves. He sat on his tombstone and he just watched. He said he could sit on the tombstone because they were family members. But he watched as I did. The problem with dowsing is, what do you end up with? Mysteries you can't solve. And that's what I've ended up with. All right, this is, I've drawn, it's kind of hard to see, but as you do the little road, this is where the McCaffrey plot is. Now, it's a Baptist church cemetery, but this particular branch of the family was Church of Christ, so I guess that's why they put him in the back beyond. But I doused the graves. I know that's my grandfather, great-grandfather Robert, my grandfather Robert, my grandmother Annie Bell. There's an adult female next to it. On the other side is an infant female, 2 infant females. Now, I know one of them because somebody put a stone later. I think it may have been my grandmother later, because the baby's name is wrong. It's not a period stone, but it was my daddy's little sister who died just at birth. Her real name was Mary Evelyn. That's on her death certificate. But both of my grandmothers put stones later for their children, and they decided to name them for their mothers. So when I win the lottery, I'm gonna fix it. So there, and then Emma Newell is, my great-grandmother is Evie, and then her husband James. There's an infant female on the other side of that. There's an adult female over here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 graves. I don't know who they are. And the records to the cemetery, as so many of them, are gone. I know that probably one of the women, one of the adults, is Y.S. McCaffrey. Because a couple of years ago, somebody gave me a book that had been my Uncle Irvin's, and in it is recorded his baby sister Emma, who is right here, Emma Newell, and practicing a beautiful script was Y.S. McCaffrey. What's her name? I'm assuming she's there. I'm assuming McCaffreys came from Wilson County about 1888. So, but it's a mystery. Maybe it's in somebody's attic. But it is, all of you know that with family history, the more you study, the more you have questions. My phone is blowing up, and I'm sorry. I should have silenced it. Just don't let me silence it. Because who's decided they need to see me? Okay. Now, another question I had. Now, one of the other things you can do with dowsing is prove something. I mentioned the aforementioned triplets were Pierce, Pearl, and Pauline. And Uncle Pierce and Aunt Ethel, I found when I started the research, had a daughter who died almost immediately after birth, and she had a death certificate. On the Obion County death certificate, it said that she was buried in Yorkville. The funeral directors, I thought that was pretty neat, is White Ransom, and they're still in existence. So I may go, I've got the death certificate, so I don't think they could tell me anything else. So I went. Now, this is their little daughter, well, I just lost her name, but she died at 2 on the Greenfield Highway. She ran out in traffic and was run over. And so there she is. There is an infant right here next to Aunt Ethel. It's blank everywhere else, and there's nothing else. So I'm sure that this is little Doris Catherine. You can see she died of pneumonia. She was only 4 days old when she died. But neat story with that. My Uncle Pierce's sister Pearl's husband, Uncle C.W., filled as informant. He put my great-grandmother Tiriola as the mother. So we know about death certificates. All right. Now that concludes part 2 of the presentation. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Graves with a very long time deal.
All right, that's a problem because your things are going to go like this. They're not going to be able to decide. But what you might do, I haven't had that, but what you might do is start at the top, and usually the woman is shorter than the man. So it might, as you go down, your things are going to go like this. When you get to the end, it may tell you probably male. Now, I don't know that for a fact. I haven't tried it. I've got friends who died within the last 2 years, and they died on the same day, and they buried them together in the same casket. I haven't doused her grave to see. Now, the other neat thing about dousing the graves is that energy is still there. So it feels, and I know this is macabre, but when you go and douse the grave, you feel like there's that person. There's that person I've researched. Now, it is kind of freaky when I did my own mother, I said, Gene, I can't do your mom and daddy. I can't, but he did. All right, the third part of my presentation, and I know all of you in here, because of the society, do research. But what I have started doing is writing narratives for each of my sets of grandparents. I have started, and what it does is it forces you to put all your research together. Now, I know some of you are strictly do the chart thing. Some of you do Ancestry. I do Ancestry, I Google, I hound family members, I do, the research on the ground. And you've got all these pieces that you put together, not to mention your family pictures. Now, the first one I did was for Jean's second great-grandfather, John Hinckley Riggs, who was with the 11th Tennessee Cavalry Coffee Company. He was, 11th Tennessee Cavalry Company. He had a pension, so I could go. So what I did is I've done to the point where I've gone in and found maps of all the battles where he was. I've included those. I've found pictures that describe. I even found a diary from somebody else who was in the company, so I could tell what was happening day by day. I've gone into the official records and put the official records in here, but everything that I can find on that person was in here. And when I got through, he wasn't John R. Riggs. He was my friend. This one, I talked about my great-grandmother. This is just their story. Nobody else. What I do is I start with the oldest member of the couple. And this, usually it's the man. Not always, but usually it's the man. And I tell about him until I reach their wedding date. And then I go and tell about her until I reach their wedding date. And then I put everything together. And, neat story, Terry Eola's daddy is actually mentioned by Jesse James, and it wasn't in a good way. But I have hounded and gotten the pictures, let's see, from the different family members. This, I've got a whole section on Pierce, Pearl, and Pauline, because they were quite a sensation in 1900 when they were born. And illustrated. Now, one of the things that you do when you do the narratives and import it is you're collecting all the pictures together that tell the story. Now, how many of you have done this? 1, 2, 3. It's time consuming, but it is so much fun. Not when your husband rolls his eyes, though. I said, oh look, I've done your grandfather. That's good. This is my book for my second and third grandparents. Now, a few of them I haven't finished. I've done the ones that don't have any research in a book. The others I've got to go back and put together, you know, because somebody wrote a book about them, and I can pull it. But, you know, you collect everything you can. Now, who's going to be interested in this? I tell my great-grandsons. I mean, my grandsons, not great, they're not great, but they are great, but they're not. And today my oldest grandson came in and said, oh, we're learning about World War I. I said, oh, how exciting, let me show you your grandfather's picture. And let's see, it would be his second great. He said, I said, sure, fine, go away. Then he said, okay, Granny, I'll look at the picture. I have of interest to, and then, of course, the one you can do the most on is the one that's the closest to you. One of the other things I do in the narrative is I explain where I've looked. That, and I said, I couldn't find it here, I couldn't find it here, I couldn't find it here. That way, if somebody else reads my work, they're not going to try to look for the same thing that I could not find. Or I say, I'm looking for something to prove that this happened. This is the one on my grandmother and granddaddy Loggins that I mentioned, that's Terriola's whole family at that point. Took me forever to find out. I do newspaper.com, fun. Now the one, where is it? I know I have it. Oh, here it is. How many of you have heard of Isaac Burton Tigert? Railroad man, keep your hands up. Hard Rock Cafe man. Okay.
I'm actually related to them.
We share a mutual grandmother. And I was, there is a man named John Wrightsammer, some of you may know him. He's working on cataloging the Tigert estate, pictures and all. And a couple of years ago, he posted something that was wrong. I'm a former English teacher. We don't have a problem correcting somebody. So I sent him an email and I said, nope, Isaac Burton Tigert Jr. is not the son of Isaac Burton Tigert. He is the son of John Burton Tigert, who was the son of Augustus King Tigert. So I have done the research on my mutual grandmother, and as I was putting it together, the other thing about doing your narratives is suddenly you go, what about that? What about that? What about that? So I Googled again. I Googled Tigert, and I came up with a living person whose name is Parks Tigert Wells. And you know where he works? Jackson, Tennessee. He's a soybean person here in Jackson, Tennessee. I didn't contact him because in my research, there had been a little bit of legal problems between his father or his mother and one of her siblings. And so I was a little afraid to contact him because of the bad blood. But I accosted in Dyersburg Sarah, who was a Tigert. I went and knocked on her door, and then we talked. And she emailed something to me, I emailed her of something I had found about her ancestral grandfather, Andrew Burton Tigert, and she sent it to Parks. I spent 2 hours with Parks Wells today and got a picture of Andrew Burton Tigert and Ludy. Ludy was the daughter of the Reverend Hamilton Parks, who, none of you are Cumberland Presbyterian, so you don't know. But Hamilton Parks was a huge influence in Dyer County. He started many, many churches in Dyer County, Cumberland Presbyterian churches, owned a lot of property. He also was instrumental in keeping Bethel College alive and Cumberland University alive. So he is an important man. I don't have any of his blood. His daughter married my great-grandfather's half-brother. So I can claim the Tigerts. So I've done a lot of research on the Tigerts. But that is another advantage to doing these narratives, is you ask yourself questions. And as you know, it's the research. Now, is there anybody else in here who wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning with those questions?
Yes.
Yes. That's what I do. I wake up and I sometimes can't stand it and I get up and research. The other thing that many of you know who research is if you research something in March, you can go back and research it less than a year later and you might find something new. So that's what I was doing as I was going through with the Tigerts. I was researching and I was Googling Tigert. Now, Isaac Burton Tigert's father was the Reverend Samuel King Tigert. Reverend Samuel King Tigert was very, very important to Union University before it was Southwestern? Yeah, Southwestern. And he,
No, that was Rhodes College.
that's Rhodes College at Southwestern. I cannot remember what Union was before it was.
it was Southwest.
You know what? I've got it.
It's had 2 or 3 other names.
But this is the Reverend, that's Mary Jane. The other problem with Tigert is they couldn't figure out how to spell it. This is the Reverend Samuel King Tigert. He would not be happy with his great-grandson. Reverend Samuel King Tigert was a devout Baptist.
The Tigert medal is the highest medal that is given to the graduates.
In Union. And what I found during my research is the Tigert medal was Isaac B. Tigert served as the president of Union, I think from 1909 to 1911, about that time. And after he left, the next president named the Tigrit Medal for him. But by 1916, I.B. Tigrit renamed the medal for his mother, Elizabeth Nunn Tigrit. So the medal that's given today is his mother's, in honor of his mother. Samuel King Tigrit died in 1899, leaving little boys. And it was Elizabeth that reared her children. And so I got to know her because I was doing this. I feel like if she walked in, I could beat her. Also, John Reitzhammer, when he was going through, I said, okay, if you find a picture of a World War I person in uniform, that's going to be Augustus King Tigrit. Found it with Elizabeth. So have that picture. And so I could tell him by going through here, all right, if you find this, it's going to be. But that's because I had spent so much time on the narrative. Just putting things in a chart doesn't give you that in depth. Yes, ma'am.
Did you know that Isaac Tigrit, the
Hard Rock Cafe?
Yeah, the Hard Rock Cafe, who only has one child. Augusta King Tigrit.
Yes, and she is the daughter
Of Maureen Cox,
who was
married
the
to Ringo Starr.
right. Yeah, you know what I did? You know that neat thing? I can say, I've got Ringo Starr in my tree. And I would just absolutely love to go back to those, my friends in the 4th grade who were wild about the Beatles and tell them, you know what?
But Mary Hurley, who was Samuel King's mother and was married to Chesterfield Tigrit, he died very young, and she married Barnabas Edwards, who is my great-great-great-great-great-uncle. And
He's your uncle? We're related.
I knew that was gonna happen.
Oh, I'm so excited.
And Mrs. Charlie, the King, the actual King family name comes from the Edwards family.
Well, I cannot prove who Mary Jane Hurley's parents are. All right, it may not be Moses Hurley. That's who people have. But I think it is Andrew B. Hurley. And the reason for that is because using the census records and putting things together, and also Moses Hurley had a child named Aaron. There is Mary Jane had a brother named Aaron. A father doesn't name 2 kids the same name unless one died. Also, Mary Jane nor any of her children were mentioned in Moses Hurley's will, which I have found. I can share that with you, and I've done a lot of research on Barnabas Edwards. I'm not sure we'd like our great-grandfather, or I don't know how many.
Yeah, he's an uncle.
Okay, well, you're probably happy he's an uncle.
I looked at that,
Yeah, he's, I did put in that's another thing I put in my narrative. If I went back in time, I'm not quite so sure I would like my second great-grandfather. And that's another thing you can put,
Union University was Southwestern Baptist University.
Thank you, it was Southwestern.
So it's Southwestern Baptist.
Yes, Baptist University. And one of the things they did, I know this is off the subject, but one of the things they did is they were getting deceased ministers' pictures to pay for the chapel. So you could put the minister's picture in the chapel and pay a certain amount of money to get it. Now, I do not know if that picture still exists. I have a feeling I.B. Tigrit probably put one for his daddy, because by that time he was already making money. I do have in the Samuel King, I found the railroad car that was named for him. So when you Google and put these things and you have a question and you gather it all together, you figure out what you have and what you don't have. And it was going back through and then going to Dyer County to open the deeds that made me go, I don't think that Moses was Mary Jane and Aaron Tucker Hurley, Mary Jane Hurley, and there was a Priscilla. I can't find Priscilla after that. She was living with Mary Jane in Chesterfield. That's another thing, we can't prove who Chesterfield's parents were because it says Samuel B. Tigert, but in the Madison County deed, Chesterfield's not mentioned. Mentions the other 10 kids, but doesn't mention unless he changed his name. So, questions, they abound, but I strongly suggest when you have a few months that you sit down and you go, okay, I'm gonna start with this particular set of grandparents and work them out. And then you will find what you've got, what you still need to find. I was working on that and I said, I gotta go back to Dyer County. So
Before you
Jean
know
went
it,
with
it'll
me.
be 4 o'clock in the morning and you're
Yeah.
up all night.
Right.
And if you do this and you can excerpt it down, that they make great articles for the family fund.
I will tell you,
That's basically what it is.
this lovely lady
The articles
was,
I write, that's kind of how mine are very small, tiny
Tiny.
narratives.
this lovely lady here sat with me and we looked at that deed, Samuel B. Tigert, because I was so sure it had been transcribed wrong. And we could not find anything that suggested. I mean, there's suggestion, but we couldn't find proof. So,
The King connection is actually Barnabas Edwards' mother.
well, they don't really know her name. Again, the researcher who's done Barnabas Edwards said we can't conclusively prove who her mother is. The other problem with Samuel King was one of the 3 founders of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church. Chesterfield Tigert, we know, was a devout Cumberland Presbyterian because his son, Samuel King, wrote it. Also, in Chesterfield Tigert's estate was a copy of the Confession of Faith, which is Cumberland Presbyterian. And I found his minister. So I was real excited. That was something, while I was working on this little narrative, I said, I wonder who was that minister? And so I went and researched him, and I've got that little blurb. So if you're reading my narratives ever, suddenly it goes, oh, she got off. Jean says I did on rabbit trails. But I wanted to know, who was this? When you're doing this, what was the denomination of the minister who married them? If they're Church of Christ, you're not going to find a minister. You're going to find the magistrate. If they're Methodist, you hope they had something in the paper. If they're Cumberland Presbyterian, you're pretty good. Got a great archives. But I will say that in doing this research, I found a number of ministers that were not found until started doing the research. But it's fun, but we got to get together because we are cousins. All right, any questions? And if you want to look through these, particularly you might be interested in the Tigert one, and say Barnabas Edwards was a Madison County person. You say Crockett County. Samuel, let's see. Isaac B. Tigert's wife was Elizabeth Nunn Tigert. Her family was instrumental in the founding of Crockett County. In fact, Dr. Isaac Augustus Nunn attempted to get it made into a county as early as I think it was 1840s, 1850s.
1872 when it was formed.
Well, it was formed then, but there were attempts in the 1840s, and I.A. Nunn was one of them went, and it's in the state records. So I am a wealth of total trivia because I spend way too much time playing with all of this. So you can combine. You go to the cemetery, you clean the stones so you can read them. You douse so that you can have more questions, and you can also meet your relatives. You can go, okay, there's Tira. I feel her. And then you can write your narrative, and it all starts all over again. So thank you for listening to me ramble. I do want to thank my husband for making your dowsing rods for you. I do want to tell you